The Galactic Empire spanned vast reaches of the galaxy, an unchallenged force of military power and advanced technology. 4 generations. It had conquered world after world, extending its reach across systems with ironclad discipline and ruthless efficiency. Its fleet, a sprawling armada of state-of-the-art warships, represented the pinnacle of galactic supremacy. Order was absolute, enforced by the Empire's hierarchy, where every being was expected to serve the Empire's insatiable desire for expansion. This conquest-driven culture shaped everything. Those who resisted were swiftly subjugated, and compliance was rewarded with protection under the Empire's vast, unyielding wing. Those who dared challenge its rule were often reduced to mere footnotes, lost in the pages of history. Amidst the ranks of the Empire stood a figure known throughout the galaxy as a brilliant strategist and unyielding leader, the Alien General. With a long record of successful campaigns, the General embodied the Empire's ideals of duty and loyalty. Each mission was a duty fulfilled, each victory a testament to the Empire's grandeur. It was to this decorated general that the Empire turned when they identified a new species, humans. The general's mission was clear-cut: assess the threat level, calculate humanity's capacity for resistance, and determine if a swift conquest could be achieved. With characteristic resolve, the general accepted the task, assuming that this new species, like so many before, would offer little resistance to the Empire's might. Initial intelligence reports painted a picture that was, to the general, almost laughably underwhelming. Humanity was marked as an unremarkable, relatively primitive species. Technologically, they lagged far behind the Empire. They hadn't yet mastered even the most basic principles of interstellar warfare, relying on outdated weaponry and limited defensive capabilities. Their lack of a centralized, unified presence in the galaxy further diminished their perceived threat. They hadn't organized a cohesive interstellar government and were, by all accounts, fragmented and divided. Empire scientists' analyses were cold and dismissive, citing humanity's shorter lifespan and higher mortality rates as evidence of their inherent fragility. To them, humans were short-lived, impulsive, and burdened with intense emotions that would inevitably cloud their judgment in battle. There was little debate. The Empire anticipated that humanity would fall as quickly as any other lesser species had, with minimal resistance. The Alien General, however, was too seasoned to rely solely on superficial assessments. Despite the Empire's confidence, the general began to pore over intercepted communications, scanning through broadcasts, and reading reports that chronicled human behavior and culture. What began as a standard review turned into something else. The deeper the general looked, the more peculiar humanity appeared. Their communications were chaotic, but filled with resilience. Their history was one of conflict, internal and external. But what surprised the general was humanity's pattern of adaptation. With each challenge, they had found ways to not only survive but thrive, often turning adversities into opportunities. There was an unusual capacity for innovation and problem-solving that the general hadn't seen in other species. Curiosity piqued. The general delved further, reviewing recordings of human responses to various crises. Again and again, humanity showed a remarkable willingness to unite under pressure, casting aside their internal differences to face common threats. Their adaptability seemed limitless. They repurposed their limited technology creatively, often devising strategies and tools in ways that went against typical military logic. It defied the rigid structure the Empire had come to expect from a potential adversary. In one intercepted broadcast, the general saw humans discussing plans to counter threats, not just with brute force, but with nuanced, layered tactics that played to their psychological strengths. Their will to survive was matched by a surprising ingenuity. And while the Empire had initially dismissed humanity as weak due to their brief lifespans, the general noticed that humans held a rare intensity. Their limited time seemed to fuel a desperate need to push boundaries, to achieve more in a few short decades than some species did in centuries. Their emotional depth, something the empire viewed as a disadvantage, seemed to be one of their core strengths. Humanity's arts, their songs and stories, radiated a spirit of endurance, of grit, and of a stubborn refusal to yield. To the general, it was becoming increasingly clear. These were not just qualities to be brushed aside. As the reports continued to unravel, the general found accounts of recent encounters between humans and scouts from the Empire. These stories were often surprising. Humans had captured scouts, interrogated them, learned from them, and even, bafflingly, released some as a gesture of goodwill or, in some cases, respect. And each scout, regardless of how they had been treated, returned with similar warnings about humanity's unpredictability and potential for rapid adaptation. An unease settled in the general's mind. Humanity was not like any other species the Empire had encountered. Their strengths lay in areas the Empire had dismissed as irrelevant or weak. Humanity's very unpredictability made them difficult to quantify, difficult to control. And their unity in times of crisis suggested that they might not be so easily subdued. In the final analysis report to the Empire's Command Council, the general did something unprecedented, issued a recommendation for caution. The general urged the council to consider a more calculated approach, suggesting that perhaps an attempt at peaceful contact might be wiser than outright subjugation. The Empire's leaders were incredulous, some outright scoffing at the idea. To them, the general's words were a surprising display of caution that bordered on weakness. Yet, the general felt a quiet conviction. Humanity, unlike other species, presented a unique and potent combination of resilience, innovation, and emotional depth. If the Empire rushed into war with humanity without understanding them fully, it could lead to a conflict far more costly than any the Empire had ever known. As the meeting concluded, the general left with a sense of foreboding. The Empire's leaders had not dismissed the idea of invasion, but the general's warning had planted a seed of doubt, if only a small one. While the Empire was powerful, the general knew that underestimating an opponent like humanity might be a costly mistake, one that could reshape the galaxy in ways the Empire was not prepared for. Humanity was, by all appearances, a paradox. Limited in technology, they lacked the interstellar advancements that defined most spacefaring civilizations. Yet, there was something about their resilience that couldn't be ignored. Earth, their home planet, presented a range of brutal environments, from scorching deserts to frigid polar regions, unyielding jungles, and vast oceans. Humans had not only survived these extremes, they had thrived in them, building cities on every continent, adapting to each climate, pushing forward with an indomitable spirit. Against nature's wrath, they had repeatedly demonstrated their ability to endure and even prosper. And in the void of space, where survival meant overcoming challenges unlike any they'd faced before, humans had developed the means to explore and survive, pushing the boundaries of their limited technology. Despite their comparative disadvantage, they seemed to view obstacles as invitations to innovate rather than deterrents. As the general pored over records of humanity's history, a pattern emerged. Humans had been at war with themselves for much of their existence. Yet rather than weakening them, this conflict had forged a species skilled in adaptation, strategy, and resilience. They'd endured countless wars, from their world wars on Earth to later battles in space, where technological disparity had not deterred them but rather motivated them to close the gap, often at an astonishing rate. During the world wars, faced with overwhelming odds, humans developed novel strategies to turn the tide: guerrilla tactics, resourceful engineering, and innovative alliances. When they reached the stars, they continued this pattern, advancing their technology by studying and sometimes reverse engineering what they encountered. In every instance, they showed a unique talent for learning from their losses, recovering from devastation, and responding with even greater determination. One particular incident caught the general's attention, a recorded battle between human forces and a much larger alien fleet that had invaded human territory. Vastly outgunned, the humans managed to repel the invaders using a mix of ingenuity and courage. They used the terrain, timing, and even psychological tactics to offset the invaders' superior technology. Observing the battle logs, the general could see that these strategies had little precedent within the Empire's rigidly hierarchical and formulaic military approach. The general began to understand that humanity's true strength wasn't found in their weapons or ships. It was in their adaptability under pressure, their willingness to try the unconventional when conventional tactics were doomed to fail. But what perplexed the general even more was the emotional bond that drove humans. They fought not just for survival or territory, but for each other. Concepts like camaraderie and loyalty permeated their battles. They displayed a fierce, almost illogical devotion to those they considered their own. This brotherhood led them to acts of courage that the general found bewildering. Humans willingly risked their lives, often charging into situations where the likelihood of survival was minimal. Stories emerged of soldiers sacrificing themselves to save their comrades, of medics rushing into danger to pull others from harm, of leaders choosing to stay behind so their troops could escape. To the general, it was an alien concept, one that defied the strict, duty-bound protocols of the Empire, where individuality was secondary to duty. The general reviewed testimonies from Empire scouts who had been captured and later released by human forces. These alien soldiers described humanity's unpredictability and the peculiar treatment they'd received. Rather than immediate execution, some had been interrogated, questioned, and even cared for before being released with a message or warning. The scouts spoke of humans' ability to turn even mundane objects into weapons, improvising defenses with a creativity that was almost incomprehensible to the disciplined minds of the Empire's military. This thinking on their feet approach defied everything the Empire knew of structured, regimented warfare, leaving even experienced scouts wary of humanity's potential. Many of these scouts described humanity's ability to adapt under fire as something bordering on reckless. They observed humans using rudimentary tools and turning them into effective deterrents, repurposing technology with an ease that suggested a uniquely flexible mindset. The humans' methods were unconventional and, at times, chaotic, but there was a pattern beneath the seeming disorder, a willingness to experiment, to fail, and to try again without hesitation. Some scouts mentioned feeling an inexplicable sense of respect, even admiration, for these beings who treated warfare not as a means of destruction, but as a test of endurance and creativity. The general, absorbing these accounts, found an unusual sense of doubt creeping in. Could it be that the Empire, so confident in its superiority, had overlooked something fundamental? In other species, the Empire's dominance had always been enough. Fear and firepower had been sufficient to quell any resistance. But with humans, fear seemed to have a different effect. Rather than submission, they responded with defiance, a willingness to fight to the last breath. Their unpredictability, their emotional strength, their resilience. These traits might prove dangerous if met with a blunt show of force. For the first time, the general began to wonder if the Empire was prepared for the kind of conflict humanity would bring. Human combat tactics were unlike anything the general had encountered in all his years of service to the Empire. Rather than relying on overwhelming firepower or organized, predictable formations, humans favored agility and cunning. Their tactics leaned heavily on guerrilla warfare, a strategy that maximized the element of surprise. They struck from unexpected places, often using terrain to their advantage, hiding within dense forests, mountainous regions, or urban environments that limited the Empire's sight lines and restricted movement. The general watched footage of human forces setting elaborate ambushes, baiting larger, more advanced forces into vulnerable positions before striking with precision. It was a style of warfare that was unpredictable and chaotic by the Empire's standards, Yet it was clear that humans thrived on this type of conflict. What stood out was humanity's ability to repurpose any technology they had at their disposal. Their engineers could take simple components and, through trial and error, transform them into powerful weapons or defensive measures. The Empire watched as humans retrofitted older technology, creating makeshift devices that could jam communications or disrupt targeting systems. Even more baffling was humanity's willingness to push beyond convention, adapting new methods mid-battle to counter unforeseen threats. This adaptability allowed them to make effective use of resources that the Empire would have dismissed as obsolete, often using them to devastating effect in small, nimble strike units. The general observed with growing concern how human commanders used unorthodox strategies that were difficult for the Empire to counter. Humanity's expertise in asymmetric warfare was especially effective. Instead of engaging head-on, humans focused on targeting key weaknesses in the Empire's infrastructure, from communication lines to supply depots. They identified vulnerable points within the Empire's networks and used cyber-sabotage, sending malware that compromised critical systems, causing disruptions in equipment, and scrambling communication channels. In one instance, they infiltrated an Empire-controlled outpost's data network, releasing a virus that rendered the weapon systems inoperable just as the Empire's forces prepared to launch a key offensive. What began as small skirmishes became genuine disruptions that left Empire commanders frustrated, unable to predict where the next attack would strike. Human commanders had studied the Empire's tactics and quickly adapted, using cyber warfare and psychological tactics to exploit any vulnerability they could find. They had a deep understanding of their own limitations, and rather than try to match the Empire's power head-on, they worked around it, refusing to engage by the Empire's rules. This approach minimized their losses while maximizing the Empire's frustration, forcing Empire officers to continually recalibrate their plans. But what unsettled the general even more was humanity's alliances with other alien races, particularly those who had been oppressed or marginalized by the Empire. Where the Empire viewed these species as lesser, humans extended a hand of partnership, treating them as equals and encouraging unity in the face of a common adversary. For centuries, the Empire had suppressed rebellion by keeping subjugated species divided, never allowing them to unite under a shared cause. But humanity's approach was different. They rallied these disparate groups, fostering alliances built on mutual respect and shared goals rather than coercion. Some of these alliances came from species who had been isolated for decades, hiding in remote sectors, living in fear of the Empire's might. When humans reached out, offering protection and friendship, these species saw an opportunity they had long thought impossible. These allies brought their own unique skills and knowledge, adding another layer of unpredictability to humanity's growing resistance. The human forces learned from their new allies, incorporating alien technology and tactics into their own. They respected the differences and strengths of each race, forming coalitions that became formidable, not in size, but in diversity and ingenuity. Together, these forces began coordinating attacks that caught the Empire off guard. What the Empire saw as inferior species were now disrupting their hold across entire sectors, slipping through defenses that had held unchallenged for centuries. One particularly devastating blow came when humans and their allies targeted the Empire's supply lines. Rather than attacking high-value targets directly, human commanders understood that by weakening the Empire's logistical backbone, they could undermine its military capabilities from within. With an intricate plan, they launched a series of surprise attacks on cargo transports, fuel depots, and munitions facilities that the Empire relied on to maintain its operations. Small, agile strike teams would appear seemingly out of nowhere, executing precise hits and vanishing before Empire reinforcements could arrive. In one instance, a convoy carrying critical supplies to a frontline base was ambushed by human forces, leaving the Empire's troops stranded without food or equipment, demoralized and unable to continue their advance. These operations forced the empire to divert resources to protect their supply chains, stretching their forces thinner and weakening their overall position. As these attacks mounted, the empire's leadership grew increasingly frustrated. Despite their superior firepower and technological advantage, they were facing an enemy that defied all conventional approaches. Human forces operated with a level of efficiency and adaptability that had rarely, if ever, been seen before in the galaxy. Empire commanders, accustomed to overwhelming their opponents into submission, were at a loss. Every time they adapted their strategy, humans found a new angle, a new method to exploit, leaving the empire scrambling to keep up. What had seemed like a quick and easy campaign to subdue a minor species was turning into an expensive, resource-draining war with no clear end in sight. The general, more unsettled with each passing day, grew increasingly vocal about the threat humanity posed. In private sessions with the high command, the general emphasized that this was not a typical adversary. Engaging humans in a prolonged war would likely lead to a disastrous conflict that would not only drain the empire's resources, but could destabilize its power across the galaxy. The general's message was clear. Humanity was not an enemy to underestimate, and a misstep could place the entire empire at risk. The general had seen enough to know that this campaign was unlike any other, and humanity's potential for resistance went far beyond anything the empire had prepared for. The general couldn't help but feel both admiration and bewilderment as they delved deeper into the core of humanity's culture. Where the empire valued hierarchy and order, humanity placed a profound emphasis on individual freedom, independence, and personal agency. They cherished the ability to choose, to create their own paths rather than being dictated by any rigid structure. In humanity's philosophy, the right to self-determination was not just a privilege. It was seen as an inalienable right, something worth fighting, and even dying for. These values resonated throughout their societies, shaping their relationships, their governments, and their resistance against any external control. This deeply ingrained sense of freedom made humanity resilient in ways that surprised the general. The more they studied human history, the clearer it became that this was a species unwilling to bow, even under threat of annihilation. Empires had risen and fallen on Earth, often trying to impose control. Yet each attempt had only strengthened humanity's collective will to resist. It was in their nature to rebel against oppression, to reject subjugation in every form. This attitude now extended into their interactions with the Galactic Empire. They saw the Empire not as an unstoppable force to fear, but as another would-be oppressor against whom they could unite. Humanity's philosophy taught them that there was no honor in submission, only in standing up for what they believed was right. The general began analyzing key moments when humans had been confronted by Empire forces, often facing impossible odds. Time and again, they found instances where human soldiers, even civilians, had chosen defiance over surrender. Captured human rebels refused to give away information, facing execution without flinching. In one instance, a small unit of humans had been cornered by Empire forces, given a final chance to lay down their arms. Rather than submit, they'd rallied, choosing to fight to the very last, aware of their slim chances, but unwilling to accept the indignity of capture. This refusal to yield wasn't simply stubbornness. It was a fundamental rejection of the notion that anyone could claim power over them. The more pressure the Empire exerted, the more determined humanity became. Their leaders encouraged it, their soldiers embodied it, and their civilians admired it. And what was perhaps most curious to the general was how this defiance was nurtured and reinforced by the humans' cultural expression, through their art, literature, and music. Unlike the Empire, where such expressions were strictly regulated or repurposed for propaganda, humans embraced creative freedom as a form of resistance and identity. The general encountered works of literature that depicted stories of underdogs standing against powerful forces, inspiring readers to believe in the power of resilience and unity. Their art often showed the triumph of freedom over tyranny, and their music, too, carried messages of solidarity, hope, and defiance. Human songs sung by soldiers on the battlefield or by civilians in besieged towns were imbued with a spirit that was almost alien to the general, yet undeniably potent. They told stories of past struggles, celebrated their heroes, and mourned their fallen, all of which fostered a sense of communal resilience that even the empire's best propagandists couldn't replicate. The general began to understand that these cultural artifacts weren't just entertainment. They were the backbone of human morale. Songs of bravery and poems of perseverance weren't idle creations. They served as pillars, reminding humanity of who they were and what they stood for. Storytelling became a powerful weapon, fortifying them against despair, reminding them that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Even young recruits and hardened veterans were buoyed by these reminders of human history and sacrifice. This cultural depth made them unyielding, bound together by a shared identity that was both ancient and adaptable, capable of weathering any storm that came their way. As the general studied these influences on human resolve, one other aspect emerged that was particularly perplexing: the human's capacity for self-sacrifice. Empire soldiers, loyal as they were, fought with an understanding that survival was paramount. Their allegiance was to the empire as a whole, not to individuals. Human soldiers, however, fought not only for their cause, but often for the lives of those around them. Time and again, the general saw examples where human soldiers risked everything to protect their comrades. During one skirmish with Empire scouts, a human soldier threw himself into the path of oncoming fire, saving a fellow soldier, but perishing in the process. This act was not exceptional by human standards, but rather something deeply embedded in their values, a willingness to lay down one's life to protect another. These sacrifices perplexed and even disturbed the alien scouts who had observed them. Many could not comprehend why a being would willingly sacrifice themselves without hesitation. To the Empire's forces, such a loss of life for individual loyalty seemed wasteful, impractical. But for humans, this concept was rooted in a bond they called brotherhood, a connection between soldiers that went beyond strategy or duty. Each human, soldier, or civilian seemed to see themselves as part of a larger whole, a collective spirit that gave them courage even in the bleakest moments. It was this connection that made them impossible to break. Even if they lost battles, even if they were pushed to the brink, the survivors carried the memory and spirit of those sacrifices forward. The general felt a profound respect for this strength of will, yet also a growing concern. How could the empire hope to defeat an enemy so utterly committed to their beliefs and so willing to endure any hardship for their freedom? Humanity's determination, their tenacity, and their ability to rally in the face of overwhelming power had created a force the general knew could not be broken by traditional means. The empire's weapons might inflict casualties, but they would never destroy the human spirit. They would fight until the very end, and their resistance would inspire future generations to continue the struggle, even if only one human remained. In a final attempt to sway the empire's leadership, the general made a plea, warning of the devastating consequences of underestimating humanity's resolve. They spoke of the humans' unwavering commitment to their ideals, their ability to endure loss, and the dangerous power of their collective spirit. Engaging in a war with humanity would mean entering a conflict that could last generations, with costs that even the empire's vast resources couldn't sustain. It was clear to the general that humanity was unlike any foe they had faced, and that their resilience would not be undone by force alone. The general urged the empire's leaders to reconsider, for what lay before them was not just a battle for territory, but a battle against an unbreakable will, a battle the empire was not prepared to face. The empire's high command listened to the general's warnings with a mix of impatience and skepticism. To them, humanity's strength of will and resilience were irrelevant against the sheer might of the empire's advanced technology and disciplined forces. What the general saw as formidable qualities, the leaders dismissed as mere nuisances, convinced that such primitive traits would never overcome the empire's overwhelming superiority. They saw the general's concerns as unnecessary caution, even bordering on weakness. After all, the empire had subjugated hundreds of civilizations, many of them initially resistant, only to fall in line once they faced the full scale of the empire's might. The decision was final. The campaign against humanity would proceed as planned. The general's pleas would be noted, but ultimately disregarded. In response, humanity steeled itself. Realizing that negotiation was futile, they prepared for the inevitable confrontation with grim determination. Messages were broadcast across Earth and the colonies, uniting people in a shared commitment to survival. Soldiers trained relentlessly, learning every tactic and countermeasure the empire might employ. Civilians took on their own roles, contributing in any way they could, whether by fortifying defenses, gathering supplies, or developing improvised weapons. Leaders stood at the forefront, speaking directly to the people, urging them to remember what they were fighting for: their freedom, their homes, and each other. From makeshift bunkers to orbital defenses, humanity set up strategic positions, focusing on areas where they could use their knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics to their advantage. On the eve of the empire's approach, human forces implemented clever, defensive measures to maximize the limited resources they had. In space, they set traps within asteroid belts, planning to catch the empire's massive fleet in bottlenecks that would reduce its maneuverability. On planetary surfaces, they established decoys to mislead the empire's scouts, making their forces appear larger than they truly were. Humanity's scientists and engineers, many of whom had minimal military background, worked tirelessly to adapt technology in unconventional ways. Simple devices were modified to disrupt the empire's communications, while older satellites were reprogrammed for early detection of incoming forces. This was no orderly army facing the empire, but rather an entire species, resourceful, united, and determined to stand their ground. As the empire's fleet drew nearer, humanity struck first, launching a carefully orchestrated ambush that would mark the opening of the conflict. The empire's ships, expecting to find a submissive, overwhelmed enemy, were taken aback as they encountered human strike teams who attacked with precise, lethal efficiency. Small, agile vessels emerged from asteroid fields, evading detection and targeting the empire's lead ships with devastating speed. Even when the empire tried to regroup, human forces moved swiftly, executing hit-and-run maneuvers that inflicted substantial damage before retreating to pre-planned fallback points. Human forces targeted the empire's support vessels, striking supply transports and forcing the fleet to reallocate resources in ways it hadn't anticipated. This wasn't a direct confrontation. It was an assault of constant disruption, disorienting the empire and causing confusion among its ranks. The general watched these developments from the empire's command center with a heavy heart. Every tactical report confirmed their fears. Humanity was indeed an enemy unlike any other the empire had faced. They saw human fighters outnumbered and outgunned, execute maneuvers that used every ounce of their ingenuity and courage. The general felt a profound sense of regret that their warnings had gone unheeded, knowing that this conflict could have been avoided if the empire had approached humanity as potential allies instead of a species to conquer. The general found themselves torn between duty to the empire and a growing respect for the humans who continued to defy all expectations. Watching the human ambush unfold, the general could not help but hope that somehow this clash might lead the empire to reconsider its approach before both sides suffered irreparable losses. Humanity's last message to the empire was clear and unwavering. Further attacks would only increase their resolve. In this message, sent to the empire's highest leaders, humanity reminded the empire of its own vulnerability, warning that every soldier lost would strengthen their collective determination. They emphasized that this was not a war humanity sought, but one they would not back down from. It was a grim declaration that left no room for negotiation, a warning that humanity would not only endure, but fight until the bitter end. With a solemn resolve, humanity's leaders made it known that they would defend their freedom at all costs, and they would be prepared to face any future conflicts with the same iron will that had brought them through countless struggles before. As the transmission ended, a silence fell over the Empire's command center. The general knew that humanity's message was more than just a warning. It was a testament to their unwavering spirit, a reminder that they would fight for every inch of their independence. In that moment, the general found a spark of hope that perhaps, eventually, the Empire might come to understand the futility of this conflict. But for now, the stage was set for an ongoing war, one that neither side would soon forget.